So without prior arrangement, the out-of-context issue is to be continued. At first glance, the poems of a special education could be said to share a certain quality of quietness with a lot of other skillful formalist verse. Work which I can appreciate the craft of, but which I do not necessarily admire. What sets these poems apart, however, is a steeliness beneath that quiet. A quiet steel not to be confused with the muted tin trumpet of polite parlor verse. Scratch the surface there, and too often you come up with nothing but a few titters of technique. Scratch the surface here, and you may find a note the air writes to the ground, or a slim comedian from in between the wars, or even a thunk, and then a gentle bling. One of the true tests of a poetic image, and I think Michael will agree with me, is how swiftly it recontextualizes itself when it is isolated from its original setting. In fact, sometimes that original context is so seamlessly assembled that one does not even notice its constituent parts until they are lifted by the prolonged gaze from the necessary stream that carries them along. This is what it means for me to really look at a poem, or to look through a poem, to gaze into each of the independent moments it contains, each of which must have a vibrancy of its own in order to contribute to the movement of the whole. It's shocking to discover how much that calls itself poetry contains no such memorable images at all. None. Yet this is precisely where one can witness the poetic sculptor at work. Line by line, gesture by gesture, each line and each gesture its own figure, each one a kind of poetry of edge and mass, and yet each one confirming rhythms in the bones that run. Lifting these lines out of context, as we've just done, unpacking the poems, as it were, reveals just how much there is packed into them. Unfortunately, it must be the case that some poems are quiet, simply because they don't have all that much to say. Yet though Meredith has a lot to say, and though she says it with great urgency, she never shouts. She never seems impatient, although I am sure she has her moments behind closed doors. She never interrupts us while we are reading her. Indeed, these poetic reflections seem to occur in the real time it takes for their shared images to unfold in a reader's mind. Something is taking shape here. That's the impression I got from each of the poems in this volume when I read them through for the first time. Something is taking shape here. And that anticipated shape, though only gradually emerging, instantly alerted all my senses. In that quiet which the poems maintain, the alerted senses of those readers who can match that quiet with their own will grow sharper and sharper. Like I said, there is the sort of quiet that is dull, dulling, and then there is the sort of quiet that is sharpened steel. Now, that this process of finding out the true shape of something can be a painful one is a fact attested to by the blank puzzle piece of the poem Jigsaw. Nor are we assured of success in this shape-shifting, shape-finding enterprise. We will not find that piece today. It's under something, in a book. And like the face he would portray, reveals itself when we don't look. Indeed, quite often what is written down here on the page, in the book, is an attempt to read what remains unwritten. What kind of book is it that no one writes? A sediment of acts will ash each leaf. Inscribed as faults The veins of shame or pride are crystal, legible until they shatter. And yet at the same time, there is a faith in the coherence of each precious word. Beneath each crystal lens, they can be read and understood. So much so that there is even a sort of untold story to be told by the radical formal dissection of these poems. And here I'll dare go beyond the simple shifting of context and delve headfirst into the sort of phonetic mysticism that is the skeleton in the closet of many a poetic formalist. Just listen to this list, for instance, of the last word in each stanza of the poem entitled The Buried Book. Strata, starker, stutter, shatter, sadder, scatter. It's this combination of faith and pain, along with a healthy dose of slant rhyme, this temporary shelter raised up between strata and scatter, between starker and sadder, between stutter and shatter, that step by step takes shape as the core curriculum of this special education. An education that seems ultimately to be the quiet struggle for expression precisely where it intersects with being itself, where being and expression become inseparable. One doesn't, as a matter of course, speak of a poet's hands. Oh, back in quill dipped in ink days, maybe the image held some candlelit currency, but our numbing tap, tap, tap on the computer keyboard hasn't done much to maintain that romance. Yet reading each of these poems, one is left with the impression of holding something, something which can be turned this way and that in one's hand, and thus something which can be examined not only with eyes open, but with eyes closed as well, by touch. And it is where to find becomes to make. Along that continuum where the intuited shape becomes the created form, where to see, in the sense of to understand, takes on the intimacy of to touch. It is there that one senses the poet's quiet hands on these poems. It is in this sense that this book, this poet's voice, has touched me. And I am convinced that as she moves through both art and life, Meredith is surrounded by a host of people who feel secure that they are in good hands. On behalf of Exot Books, I give you Meredith Bergmann.